Gospels are written by unknown individuals. We don't know who they were. The names were given to them in the early 2nd century. For example, the Gospel of Matthew, there is a man called Papias of Hierapolis who gave this name to the Gospel of Matthew.
Number one, he didn't give the names to the Gospels. When we actually read his writings, which are preserved through Eusebius, Papias tells you that he learned from disciples of the apostles. And specifically, he even learned from John the Apostle himself. Now, I'm not going to make the argument that John the Presbyter is John the Apostle because I don't have time for that. Instead, I'm going to agree with the bare minimum that he's learning from John the Presbyter, who was a disciple of John the Apostle, which then shows that Papias is an independent writer who's receiving his information directly from a disciple of the apostles. And he affirms that Mark's gospel is from Mark, the disciple of Peter, who preserved what Peter preached and taught, and that the Gospel of Matthew is actually written by Matthew. And yes, that also does include the Greek version of Matthew, since the Greek version of Matthew was accepted by the unanimous church. And if it wasn't from Matthew himself, it would have been rejected in some parts of the churches, which is not what you actually see in history.
These were anonymous documents, and they were not scripture. Even in the 2nd century, they were not called scripture. They were called the memoirs of the apostles.
Then he brings up Justin Martyr, who calls the Gospels the memoirs of the apostles. Now, number one, something we have to keep in mind is that Justin Martyr was not writing in detail about who wrote what Gospels or what the New Testament canon is, unlike Papias. Justin Martyr was arguing against Jews who didn't believe Jesus was the Messiah, and even arguing against the Roman Empire for accusing Christians to be cannibals. So to expect to find Justin Martyr to go into detail about the authorship of the gospel is to ignore the fact that Justin Martyr's works were not about who wrote what gospel, but was about defending what Christians believe. But even though Justin Martyr does not go into detail on who wrote what gospel, he tells you at bare minimum that the gospels contain eyewitness accounts because they are the memoirs of the apostles.
They were given the status of scripture in the 3rd century. In fact, Irenaeus is the first person to have mentioned the 4 gospels together for the first time, 200 CE. This is quite late, by the way. We have close to nothing from those disciples who actually walked with Jesus, talked to him, ate with him, learned from him, heard him, saw him, felt him. We have virtually nothing.
Then he brings up Irenaeus, and I don't know what his exact argument is because Irenaeus doesn't show that the Gospels were anonymous. Irenaeus is preserving what he was taught by Polycarp. Polycarp was a direct disciple of John the Apostle himself. So the information that Irenaeus is telling us comes directly from John the Apostle, who's in a position to know who wrote what Gospels. So when we compare Papias, an independent writer, from Irenaeus, if the Gospel of Mark was truly not written by Mark, what you would expect to see is disagreement between Papias and Irenaeus, who get their informations from different people who can be traced back to John. Instead, what you see is that they're in agreement. So unfortunately for the Stonelaker, he fails to show why the Gospels are anonymous and actually ends up proving that the Gospels were always known to be written by the apostles.